Welcome to the Orca. Boy, this past weekend started with the news that all signs were pointing to an announcement that LNG Canada was going ahead, a $40 billion commitment. And then we had a last-minute trade deal between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Both stories vitally important not only to Canada, but to the BC economy in particular. And the construction industry is going to be very busy indeed, thanks to all this good news. Chris Gardner is the president and the CEO of the Independent Contractors Businesses Association and joins us here on the Orca. Hello there.
Hey, Rick. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with USMCA. It's going to take a while to get used to saying it, USMCA. Details still pretty scarce because it has to be ratified, but from what you know, is this a good deal?
Well, yes, I think it's a good deal. And I think we saw what was happening for the last number of months with all the uncertainty around what was then called NAFTA. And that was primarily because the administration of Donald Trump was taking a very different approach to trade deals compared to not only his Democratic predecessor, but his Republican predecessors. And that was creating a lot of confusion, not only between Canada and the U.S., but other countries in the world. So the fact that we're able to work through all that, sign this deal, vitally important to our economy, vitally important to our long-term prosperity. The numbers of jobs that this will create and opportunities it will provide for Canadians is enormous for our economy. So it's very good news.
Specifically, what does it mean for those of us here in BC then?
Well, for BC, we have to understand that we're very small. First of all, Canada is a small economy on a global scale compared to, the U.S. is the largest economy in the world. China, may overtake the U.S. in the next decade or so. These are enormous economies. We rely on access to markets in the United States, but also other countries around the world. So the fact that we're able to solidify what the rules of the game are will create opportunities for businesses in British Columbia. If those rules are up in the air, or if we don't have rules, if we go back to the time when there wasn't a formal trade agreement between Canada and the United States, it becomes, our goods and services become subject to duties and tariffs. It's much more difficult to compete. And without access to the largest economy in the world, our economy will suffer. So this will mean going forward, jobs and opportunity investment for British Columbia and the opportunities to continue to grow our economy and create long-term prosperity.
Can you give us an example of how this will directly benefit your members?
Well, construction in British Columbia employs about 250,000 men and women. It's about 10% of the provincial economy. And construction thrives when the overall economy thrives. We're a big generator of economic activity, but oftentimes, think of what is being built. We build everything from new condominiums. Well, people aren't going to be buying new homes and condominiums when they have confidence in the economy. When things are looking forward optimistically, people are going to say, hey, I'm going to buy a new home or I'm going to buy a larger home. So the housing sector, condominiums, single-family homes, townhome complexes, is important on investor confidence in a strong economy. You go beyond that in terms of infrastructure. Governments invest in infrastructure when there's a need for improvements in capital so that our economy can compete. And when the private sector invests in infrastructure, it's because they have investment and they have confidence in the economy. So private sector companies aren't going to look at British Columbia as a place to invest if the economy is not doing well. They're not going to put investment capital at risk and build infrastructure if they don't think the economy is going to be growing and there won't be opportunities in British Columbia. So a strong economy is vitally important for the construction supply chain, whether that's investments by government, investments by the private sector, and ultimately for consumers to be purchasing and or using a lot of these facilities and infrastructure.
Taking what you just said on that topic and looking ahead to the LNG announcement later this week, it appears that Royal Dutch Shell and its partners are willing to commit $40 billion to the development of LNG resources here in BC. What is that going to mean?
Well, it's the largest private sector investment in British Columbia, but also in Canada. So enormous opportunities. And the opportunities will cascade across hundreds of communities in this province and beyond our borders for thousands of workers, workers who will be directly employed, but also the workers who are going to be involved in the supply chain. And if you think of what it's going to take to build a pipeline that's going to go from Fort St. John to Kitimat to transport the gas, and then the facility at Kitimat to compress the gas and send it in and put it into tankers so it can ship to markets around the world, primarily Asia. Enormous amount of logistics and resources are going to be required to do that. So everything from local hotels, local restaurants, in more remote locations, there'll be folks who design and build work camps, people who work in those camps providing everything from cleaning and hospitality and culinary services. And then you've got the folks who'll be manufacturing the steel for the pipe, and then the pipe fitters and the electricians and the welders, and then you need project managers, and there's a whole host of services that are going to flow from this project, enormously important. And then think of Indigenous communities. Every single Indigenous community along that pipeline, the Coastal GasLink pipeline, has signed an agreement that will provide benefits in terms of revenue for the communities, training opportunities, job opportunities. These communities are going to come to life in a way we haven't seen before. This is an opportunity for the next generation of Indigenous young people and leaders to really to change their communities in ways that they wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago.
Some First Nations are calling this a generational project because it will affect the young people and improve their lot in life.
If you think of this project, what it will mean for those, I think it's 19 First Nations who've signed agreements with Coastal GasLink. If you take that project away, where is the next $40 billion project? And the pipeline, I think it's about $8 billion of the $40 billion. Where is that investment coming from? And the answer is it's probably not coming. So this is generational. This is very important. This will provide opportunities not only during the construction phase of the project, but beyond. Because the agreement with those Indigenous communities is a revenue sharing agreement throughout the life of the project. So for the next 40, 50, 60 years, First Nation communities are going to be benefiting directly from the revenues that flow from this project. And they can make those important investments in clean water facilities and classrooms for schools, in centers for their seniors, and community centers for young people. Very exciting and very important.
It still has some political hurdles to clear. Do you foresee any difficulties?
No, I don't think there. I don't see any well, there will be some interesting politics around what the Green Party decides to do in Victoria, but I would expect the strategic importance of this project means that it will get through the legislature in some way, shape, or form. But I think the real focus now has to be on ensuring that LNG Canada is not an outlier. We've had project after project delayed or cancelled in Canada and British Columbia.
Having said that, what does this project mean? If this project goes through successfully, what does it mean for future major investment in Canada and British Columbia?
Well, it certainly sets the table and sends a signal that you can get a major project approved and built in Canada. However, our concern is that a lot of the table was really set for this by the previous provincial government. The new provincial government is reviewing every single piece of legislation and the processes and the regulatory procedures and the tax framework that supported this project getting to yes, with a view to making it more difficult to get projects approved. And that regulatory framework, if it becomes more difficult because of what's happening in Ottawa and Victoria, will mean we won't see another LNG Canada or projects that may not be as big but equally important for different reasons. So our concern is that we have to understand in Canada that we're a small economy, and we have to be nimble. We have to have a regulatory framework that will attract investment and get projects approved, a tax framework that says you can make investments in Canada and the returns will make sense, and opportunities to get these projects approved in a way and a time frame that makes sense. If we put requirement after requirement and hurdle after hurdle in their way, investors will go to other jurisdictions, and they're already doing that. The energy and the oil and gas sector in Canada is effectively on its knees. This is the first big announcement that's come along in probably a decade. But up until now, we've had major energy companies leaving Canada, selling their assets and going elsewhere because we can't get things done. So this is important to send the signal that you can get business done. But fundamentally, for governments in Ottawa and Victoria, they have to do a better job of making sure we're competitive.
It was an extraordinary weekend, wasn't it?
It was a great weekend.
Chris, thank you.
Thank you.